Hello, everybody. How are we doing? Would it be a stream on a Sunday without some small technical difficulties? No, no, it wouldn't. But we'll be with you momentarily. To be fair, it's my fault. I was running late anyway. Uh, and now I can't get logged in. We'll get there eventually. Come on. There we go. Here we go. We're nearly there. Let's do this. Grab these. How are you all doing? Zeto1RO. How are you doing? How's it going? Can you hear the Singapore national anthem? Here we go. Hello, Jamie, mate. How are you doing? Oh, hiccups as well. Oh, God, it's all going wrong. All going wrong. No, I got hit. Oh, dear. How are you all doing? We're doing good. Singapore, my favourite race of the season. Cannot complain. It's literally on the wall behind me, apart from it's now changed a little bit. Like this bit is now different, which is annoying. How do I get rid of hiccups? Why have they started all of a sudden? Oh, right. Let's get into it. Should we talk predictions first and foremost? Dive straight into what's going to happen this weekend then. I mean, it's very different to what I was expecting to see coming into this weekend. I thought this track would be tricky for Red Bull, but nowhere near as tricky as it has been. I also thought it was going to be tricky for Ferrari, but it hasn't been tricky for Ferrari whatsoever. Carlos Sainz looks like a new man since the summer break. I think in Netherlands, last time out in Monza, and this weekend in Singapore, Carlos Sainz has been absolutely exceptional. Oh, I'm so sorry about these hiccups. But I think if I'm going to go first, second, third, I don't know whether it's just the Red Bull indoctrination, but I just feel like Max is still going to be able to get up there. Maybe not win, because I feel like the Ferraris do have enough pace and overtaking opportunities will be at a minimum. George Russell also looks really good this weekend. Like, he's looked better this weekend than he has for quite a considerable amount of time, I'd say, George Russell. So I'm going to go Carlos Sainz, first place. Gets the win. I'd love that so much. What? Second place. George Russell. Third place, Max Verstappen. I think Max Verstappen will be able to get back up towards the podium positions. But I just want Lando in there as well. I'm so hesitant to put Lando on there. It's an opportunity for him to get a victory. Charles Leclerc starting in third as well. Oh, it's going to be this is going to be so fun to watch. Just because it's not like say Miami where Max Verstappen started towards the back, but obviously easily kind of cycled his way through. This is actually, he was up back there on pace. And the Ferrari just looks so good. Looks so quick off the outside of the corners. But best drive, I think, could... Again, it just depends on the start. I feel like the start of this Grand Prix is going to be so incredibly important. Best drive, I'm going to go Liam Lawson. I reckon he holds out for some points, you know. Just about holds out for a point scoring position, does Liam Lawson. Proves the AlphaTauri team made a mistake not getting him in earlier and went for Nick DeVries at the beginning of the season. They should have just gone straight in for Liam. Best team, looking like Ferrari this weekend. I think could also be Mercedes, depending on how Lewis Hamilton is able to deal with the race pace of this Mercedes car. And then the struggle has to be Red Bull, doesn't it? Has to be Red Bull. Could also be Aston Martin. Obviously, Aston Martin only running with one car now. Lance Stroll is out for the race. I think it was kind of a combination of the fact that he is still holding on to an injury from the start of the season. He obviously injured his wrists before the season started. And then on top of that, they had to try and put together literally the entire Aston Martin car. And I don't think they would have been able to get it to a level where they would have wanted it to be going into this race. So I can understand why they've just decided to leave Lance Stroll out and not taking part in the race, but is looking forward to coming back in Japan. He said a little while before the Grand Prix. I don't know where these hiccups have come from. I really can't get rid of them. Ugh. Manifesting a Lando win. I would absolutely go mental. I would love that more than anything else. But I just... The Ferrari looks so good. I don't even know how. I was looking at some of the timing sheets for the Ferrari car yesterday, and it just looks so good. Especially the telemetry, as I was saying, on the exit of those slow speed corners. Just able to like plant itself, get the traction down, and the acceleration that they have for that initial point of contact. Just so incredibly good at Ferrari. It's crazy to see. Obviously, we have got the brand new look Singapore track. Removed 16, 17, 18, and 19. So a longer rundown in that final sector. You can see where the final sector starts just after that yellow tab. There used to be a little right, left, right in there, but now it's just a perfect straight. And still 3 DRS zones that the drivers will be able to use. Odds on a Russell win. If he can get into first place off the start, maybe. Although, again, saying that, Mercedes, generally speaking, if I was going to back a Mercedes or a Ferrari strategy, probably go for a Mercedes over a Ferrari strategy 99% of the time, wouldn't you? So maybe George Russell's going to be able to get the upper hand as the strategy happens. I'd trust Mercedes to be able to try and do something. I just feel like he's not going to be able to overtake the Ferraris, because the Ferraris still do have, first of all, the straight line speed advantage, and secondly, the advantage with DRS and stuff too. So I just can't see a way in which Russell gets an out-and-out victory without something a little bit extra going his way. Of course, there could be like a safety car, a red flag, a very tight, twisty track here in Singapore. But we'll have to wait. Oh, have I lost internet connection? Have I stopped? Oh my god, these hiccups are actually gonna murder my life. Odds on Ferrari. I feel like Ferrari looking better than Mercedes. No reserve driver instead of Stroll. Just no second Aston Martin. I think mainly because, one, obviously the driver, as I said, but two, the car as well. I think to rush the car back together again just to put Felipe Drugovich in for a race, they maybe couldn't have sort of, first of all, seen the purpose behind that, but secondarily, kind of the financials behind that might not have been worthwhile for Aston Martin. Whereas they've now got a week to put that car back together again in the way that they'd want to. They can sort it out fully. They're not running a risk of like chucking a car out there that may go wrong again. Yeah, I feel like it was a warranted decision from the Aston Martin team not to put a car out there. If Haas can stay in the points, it would be a great weekend. Haas, I don't know what's happened to Haas. I was expecting, like, all of my predictions have just been thrown out the window, because I was expecting Aston Martin to be good, McLaren to be good, and don't get me wrong, they're kind of middle of the pack, but Mercedes and Ferrari have come out of absolutely nowhere, in my opinion. And then I was expecting Haas to be terrible because Alfa Romeo and AlphaTauri have got their upgrades coming this weekend, whereas Haas haven't got their upgrades until Austin. But Haas looked phenomenal in qualifying. But yeah, as you say, as Boy says, a lot of the time we do see Haas much better off in qualifying than in terms of race pace. So we do still have to kind of give a little bit of leeway. And yeah, if the Haas can hold on to its tyres a little bit, then maybe the car can get some kind of points going. Although the tyre problem shouldn't be as big of an issue. There's not the hundreds of overtaking opportunities that we sometimes have, and it is going to be more of a strategy race. So as long as they're fairly good on the tyres, like coming out of the pits, they should be all right. But there is a lot of safety car red flag stuff that could happen too, which could completely change the complexion of this race, as we've seen all the way back from the starting race that we saw in Singapore back in 2008. What a race that was. Controversial, to say the least. Felipe Massa is still in court now about it, 15 years later. That's how controversial the first ever Singapore Grand Prix was. But hopefully we won't have that kind of thing. Zhou Guanyu starting from the pit lane, I should also mention as well. Deciding to put some extra bits and pieces onto that Alfa Romeo car. Makes sense. They really didn't qualify well yesterday, considering where I thought they were going to be. But again, he would have been starting from the back anyway. Get the constructors table up, of course again. There are a possibility of a few changes. Ferrari are kind of trying to hunt down Mercedes, although Mercedes looking a lot better this weekend than I thought they were going to, and therefore Mercedes probably going to be able to hold on to that second place, at least for the foreseeable future, even if Ferrari do manage to get a crazy points haul. I mean, they would hold on to it anyway, but like hold on to it fairly comfortably. McLaren's an interesting one. They're still 100 points off Aston Martin. Seems like a little bit too much, but you never know. Maybe a couple of really good podium positions and double points finishes, especially if Lance Stroll isn't taking part. But the problem is Oscar Piastri got completely done over by that Lance Stroll red flag, and obviously is starting right towards the back of the grid. Williams and Alpine kind of also in no man's lands by themselves. And then Haas, Alfa Romeo, and AlphaTauri. That's an interesting one. AlphaTauri obviously trying to pick up at least a few more points, try and close that gap a bit. But Haas looking the more likely of the cars to pick up points in terms of their qualifying position. So we'll have to wait and see where they get to go. Please talk about Stroll. Is he a waste of money for Aston Martin? At this moment in time, you'd have to kind of argue yes. He is a bit of a waste of money, isn't he, Lance Stroll? Oh, why is my live board not coming up? There we go. At this moment in time, you'd have to argue, yeah, probably is a little bit of a waste of money, just because the Constructors' Championship and Drivers' Championship points kind of speak for themselves. If they had two Fernando Alonso's, they'd still be properly in the hunt with Mercedes and Ferrari for that second place finish in the Constructors. But unfortunately, it's looking like fourth is pretty much guaranteed for Aston Martin. And if it goes really badly, then fifth is where they could end up, which, considering where they were at the beginning of the season, would be a little bit disappointing. But the problem with Lance Stroll is the contract situation is so incredibly difficult to understand. Like, we can speculate with other teams and we understand how other teams are structured. We just have no idea how that contract with Lance Stroll is structured in any way whatsoever. And therefore, we have no insight into how that could change with either of those two. Anyway, 62 laps of the Singapore Grand Prix. Couple more laps than normal just because of that change to the final sector. Oh, that Williams livery is so nice this weekend as well. And then around about 2 hours of racing. We're probably going to fill out that 2 hours of racing, to be honest with you. The Singapore Grand Prix is one of the longer and more difficult tracks for these drivers to contend with. looking like a one-stop strategy again for most cars. A lot of guys starting on the mediums, as you can see. Charles Leclerc opting to start on the soft compound tyre. So Ferrari clearly wanting to go soft onto hard with Charles Leclerc and maybe go for a slightly different strategy. Sainz, Russell playing it a little safer with the medium compound tyre. Then you can see Verstappen, Perez going for something completely different on the hard compound tyre. Maybe, just maybe, holding on for a safety car. I can imagine that being part of the strategy in mind for Red Bull, especially if it's just after some of those medium and soft compound tyre runners have decided to come in for a pit stop. They can hold on to those hard tyres long enough. Piastri starting on the soft compound tyre. Tsunoda starting on the soft compound tyre. Those guys will be trying to make moves forward as quickly as they possibly can. And as I said, Zhou Guanyu starting from the pit lane. So as we see the formation lap coming around with these drivers coming through, just waiting on them to come. When does it start? Literally about a minute's time. We're just waiting for the cars to come around the final sector as we see Carlos Sainz snaking the cars through the final left-hand corner onto the pit straight. Oh. I have a question about Stroll. Is he that bad, or is Alonso that good, or maybe a bit of both? Definitely a bit of both, to be honest. Definitely a bit of both. Like, he's nowhere near the level of Fernando Alonso. Like, that is just plain to see. But also, I think if you look at some of the performances that have been put in this season, there have been some questionable ones. There have been some very, very questionable performances from Lance Stroll. Like, at the beginning of the season, I was kind of willing to give him a little bit of leeway. Obviously, he was coming back from an injury. Saudi Arabia wasn't his fault. The car faltered on him. And he was doing okay. Kind of got a few 4th places, 5th places. Was banding around in the points. But recently, like just before and post-summer break, Fernando Alonso's still been kind of sniffing in and around the point scoring positions quite often. Lance Stroll's been nowhere near. Lance Stroll's finished like 14th, 15th, 16th. And it's like, ugh, you can't really give them that much leeway. Here we are then. The 18 drivers have taken their place on the grid. 5 lights. And we are away then. Carlos Sainz and George Russell will go down towards the first corner together. Charles Leclerc using those soft compound tyres to get the jump on George Russell. And it's 2 Ferraris going side by side. Lewis Hamilton is pushed off by his teammate. Has to go wide in turn 2, and Lewis Hamilton rejoins the track, I think ahead of George Russell. They're going to be side by side, the Mercedes cars once again, and Hamilton has indeed jumped up into the podium positions. Lando Norris dropping down into 5th. The stewards are going to be looking, though, at that between Lewis Hamilton and George Russell. I think Hamilton trying to give the position back to Russell. No, not this time around. But so difficult for these cars to all sneak through this middle sector as the Hasses and the Alpines are going side by side. Incredibly close to the wall there, Esteban Ocon, but just about keeps himself ahead of Kevin Magnussen. Max Verstappen has been able to move up into 10th place. Liam Lawson, unfortunately, off the start, dropping down a couple of positions down into 12th. Russell on the radio. Russell asking, is he going to let me back past? I did think Lewis Hamilton would have to let George Russell back past because he gained that position whilst he was off the track, Lewis Hamilton. But if he did go through the entire escape road and round the bollard, then there's kind of the question of, did he take that place or did he follow where he needed to go? Fernando Alonso up into 6th place. Yellow flag in Sector 3. And I can't see anybody in particular. Yuki Tsunoda has actually dropped all the way to the back of the pack. Oh, Tsunoda, yeah, he had stopped. But he's back going again. Obviously dropped behind Zhou Guanyu. And is this Yuki Tsunoda again? With a fault at the beginning of a Grand Prix. We remember Monza, where he didn't even start the first lap of the Grand Prix. And now another fault for Yuki Tsunoda. Looks like it's brought him to a stop. Green flag is out, but the Yuki Tsunoda's car still looks stationary. Wow. And yeah, Yuki Tsunoda's out of the car. So Yuki Tsunoda out of this Grand Prix and joins Lance Stroll in the garage for the rest of the Singapore Grand Prix. That's 2 races in a row where Yuki Tsunoda hasn't been able to take part because of the AlphaTauri car. That is really poor from the AlphaTauri team. And nothing that Yuki Tsunoda could really do about that. Lando Norris all over the rear wing of Lewis Hamilton, as Hamilton has now given that place back to George Russell. Thank you, Jamie, for the membership. 14 months. Wow, 14 months. Thank you so much for that one. Oh, is it going to load? There we go. A little bit more information for you as we delve into the 3rd lap of the Grand Prix. The DRS will be enabled anytime now. And we're going to start to look at these battles. Ooh. Lando Norris also raising with the race director that Lewis Hamilton should have to give that position back. And Lewis Hamilton did gain those positions, obviously, on Lando Norris. Oh, Zhou Guanyu into the pits for a really early pit stop. So trying to maybe wangle a little bit of a different strategy at Alfa Romeo there. Zhou already completing his 1 mandatory pit stop. Goes from the soft compound to the hard compound tyre. I did think we might see a few drivers go for this, you know, the kind of 0 stop strategy. I suppose Zhou has done it very early. We usually see it kind of later, but maybe he's expecting a safety car of some kind or a red flag of some kind. So Zhou Guanyu is going to go all the way to the end, you'd imagine, on those hard compound tyres. 60 laps to complete on them. And here is Max Verstappen side by side with a Haas car in 9th place now. Has managed to get past Nico Hulkenberg, but Kevin Magnussen is the next Haas up. And Magnussen closes the door very, very quickly. Hello, Florian. How are we doing? Sainz and Leclerc then lead the Grand Prix for Ferrari as they alternate fastest laps with one another. Charles Leclerc on the softer compound tyre. And turn 2 involving Lewis Hamilton, noted leaving the track and gaining an advantage. So the teams, the stewards are going to have a little look at that, whether Lando Norris should be given that position back from Lewis Hamilton. Although Lando Norris now within 0.6 of a second of Lewis Hamilton might try and get past the Mercedes on track anyway. Charles Leclerc now dropping to outside of a second behind Carlos Sainz. Won't have the DRS on his teammate. Maybe just holding onto those tyres a little bit nicer. Going a little bit longer on those soft compound tyres. George Russell holding on to 3rd place, but has also dropped fairly far behind Charles Leclerc now. 1.5 seconds the gap. Let's have a gander. So Lewis Hamilton goes down the outside. Brakes. Ooh. Brakes very, very late. And doesn't really have anywhere to go. I think he definitely did have to give the position back to George. Whether he had to give the position back to Lando. I think Lando might unfortunately have to hold on to 5th place. Oh no, Lando's gone in front. I lied. Lando's back in front of Lewis Hamilton. Charles Leclerc with a great start. Obviously on the softer compound of tyre, you can see just absolutely launches himself past the Mercedes of George Russell. And here's Oscar Piastri. Oh. And that was Sergio Perez, I think, with contact. Oh, it was contact. Contact between Sergio Perez and Yuki Tsunoda. And I think Yuki Tsunoda picked up a puncture and wasn't going to be able to get that AlphaTauri car back home again, so pulled down an escape road. And Lewis Hamilton has indeed given those positions back and is back in 5th place. But yeah, the onboard there, Yuki Tsunoda and Sergio Perez coming together. And the Red Bull drivers over the course of this weekend just causing more and more chaos for themselves, aren't they? Liam Lawson ruining his Red Bull career by dropping Max Verstappen all the way down into 11th place. Got Daniel Ricciardo still injured. Nick De Vries chucked out midway through the season. If you're a Red Bull driver, it's just tricky. It's tricky right now. No further investigation for Lewis Hamilton. Obviously, he has given those positions back now. So back into 5th place for Lewis. And you can see Carlos Sainz and Charles Leclerc just leading the Grand Prix and eking out a little bit more of a lead over the Mercedes of George Russell. Now down to 1.7 seconds between 2nd and 3rd place. And George Russell 2.5 seconds off the leader of the race, which is still Carlos Sainz. Max Verstappen still all over the rear wing of Kevin Magnussen as we watch on board with the Red Bull World Champion. Kevin Magnussen, though, putting up a really good fight. Obviously, on the slightly softer medium tyres. Is Max Verstappen going to be able to get past this time? No. The gap once again closed by Kevin Magnussen. And it feels like maybe Max Verstappen kind of caught Nico Hülkenberg sleeping a little bit, because Kevin Magnussen is doing an exceptional job at keeping this Red Bull behind. And they're just holding up the Red Bull of Max Verstappen. Max now, as you can see, nearly 10 seconds behind the lead of Carlos Sainz. And every single lap that he's behind the Haas, he's going to be losing out more and more to the Ferrari. So need to keep an eye on Max Verstappen. He's going to use DRS. He's going to try and go down the inside as Max Verstappen. Is it this time? Yes. Verstappen finally gets past Kevin Magnussen. He's been knocking on the door of the Haas car for the last few laps now. But Verstappen finally makes it stick. Oh, Joe thought he had a puncture. Oh, sorry, Tsunoda had a puncture. But yeah, Sergio Perez is dicing through the field and trying to get past Oscar Piastri now. Has got past Oscar Piastri, it looks like. Piastri now fighting with Alex Albon and Logan Sargent in the Williams cars. It is crazy weekend from weekend, isn't it? Alex Albon looking like a comfortable points finisher last time out in Monza. And now struggling down in 15th position with his teammate Logan Sargent just behind. And Esteban Ocon, for instance, who looked absolutely dead and buried in Monza in that Alpine car, running really comfortably in 7th place. Has Max Verstappen behind him, but Max Verstappen 1.6 seconds off the Alpine. And Verstappen still losing more and more time to the leaders of this Grand Prix. 9.8 seconds Verstappen's gap to Carlos Sainz. That bumps up to 10 seconds now as Carlos Sainz continues to move forward in that Ferrari. They have a couple of seconds advantage, or nearly 3 seconds advantage over George Russell in 3rd place now does Carlos Sainz. And the two Ferraris doing what we usually see from Max Verstappen in a Red Bull and disappearing up the road a little bit. Surprised we haven't heard Charles Leclerc on the radio, obviously on the softer compound tyre. And you'd imagine would want to be let go by his teammate to try and make up as much ground as possible, because he is going to have to pit earlier than his teammate. But Charles Leclerc sitting behind. I think that would be a difficult sell for Carlos Sainz to let his teammate past, to be honest. And there is Yuki Tsunoda back in the pit lane. McLaren cars, each with his livery. Yeah, that's very true. The stealth McLaren. I'm not sure I like the stealth McLaren, I'm going to be honest with you. Feels like a little bit of a dull one, doesn't it? But the Alex Albon, Logan Sargent, Williams Golf livery this weekend is very nice indeed. I know it was voted for by the Williams fans and the Formula One fans themselves. Oh, I see what you mean. The Williams car. So Golf are working with Williams this season. That's why Williams have the special Golf livery this weekend. Whereas the McLaren livery is for their partner that is on the side of the car that I can't remember. Something KX, OKX, ORX. I'll tell you once it comes past. OKX, yeah. OKX is the partner for McLaren's livery this weekend in Singapore for the special livery. But yeah, the Golf livery for the Williams team, Singapore and Japan as well. So we're going to see it in both of those Grand Prix. Max Verstappen hasn't closed the gap to Esteban Ocon in the way that I was expecting him to have, to be honest. Still 1.5 seconds off of Esteban Ocon. And I know he's going long on those hard compound tyres. That is very true. So he will have the ability to obviously go for some fast laps when he's got that free air. But at the same time, he's not, closing in on Esteban Ocon in the ridiculously fast fashion. You have to remember, though, if Max Verstappen moves to more than 20 seconds behind the leaders, then they will come out in front of Max Verstappen anyway come the pit stops. So Max Verstappen 10 seconds behind Carlos Sainz. If that doubles, then Carlos Sainz will come out in front of Max Verstappen after the pit stop anyway, and then he won't have that free air to be able to do it. Williams copying the fastest car. But again, they're looking at Charles Leclerc and Carlos Sainz 10 laps in now to this Grand Prix. 53 laps left to go. And Carlos Sainz has led every single one of them. Sets the fastest lap of the Grand Prix now, does Carlos Sainz. And Leclerc just hovering still around that kind of second behind his teammate. Gets the DRS. Ooh. They're targeting a gap to Sainz of 3 seconds. So Ferrari asking Charles Leclerc to just drop off the back of his teammate, I think, to preserve those soft compound tyres just that little bit better. Maybe they're seeing a little bit of temperature graining and degradation on those Ferrari tyres and wanting Charles Leclerc just to drop out of the dirty air of Carlos Sainz just a little bit. And we're seeing Charles Leclerc doing that, to be fair. Already, the gap from 0.9 to 1.3 seconds from Charles Leclerc's. But the problem is he doesn't want to back up too much into the Mercedes of George Russell, who is only 3 seconds off Carlos Sainz himself. So if Charles Leclerc does drop to 3 seconds behind Sainz, he's going to be right in range of George Russell. Probably wants to keep himself out of DRS of George Russell. So maybe we'll see Charles Leclerc drop to about 2 seconds behind his teammate. But I can't imagine him pushing all the way to the full 3 seconds behind his teammate. Norris 4 seconds off the lead. 1.2 seconds off of George Russell. Lewis Hamilton also down in 5th place. Hovering around in the Mercedes just in case something happens to these leaders. Still very much a podium on for both of those cars. A little bit of then a gap to Fernando Alonso. The 3 seconds to the Aston Martin. And Carlos Sainz, very happy indeed, saying that he could go forever at this pace. And he's not, blisteringly fast right now, Carlos Sainz, but is putting in some decent lap times. Just again, keeping himself ahead of the majority of the field in terms of race pace. No traffic, of course, for Carlos Sainz. In the clean air, out in front, Charles Leclerc has dropped to 1.6 seconds, nearly 1.7 seconds behind his teammate now. Again, holding on to those soft compound tyres a little longer. George Russell. It looks like they're going to sacrifice Leclerc, says the radio from the Mercedes mechanic to George Russell. I'm not sure that's the case. I think they're just trying to hold on to these soft compound tyres a little longer. Is Charles Leclerc gonna push themselves back all the way? Difference between lap times of Sainz, Hamilton, Alonso, Verstappen. Too big for comfort for those three. That's very true. Very true. Although Carlos Sainz still only 10 seconds ahead of Max Verstappen. 10.5 seconds now. It's kind of dropped a little bit where Carlos Sainz was taking half a second or so out of Verstappen every single lap, but now just dropping down a touch. But you have to think Max Verstappen was in a little bit of traffic behind the Hasses. Had to get past Hülkenberg and Magnussen. Both of the Hasses holding on pretty well, actually. I know we're only 12 laps into the Grand Prix, but Magnussen 9th, Hülkenberg 10th. Both in the points for the Haas car this weekend. Sainz only has to fight the pit wall. I feel like Ferrari, they're under less pressure to gamble on something crazy. So maybe they'll just take like the actual pit stop that you should, and they'll be all right. But again, there is still the possibility of a safety car. There's a possibility of virtual safety cars as well that could bring any of those drivers, even towards the back of the pack, right back into it. Liam Lawson down in 12th place for the AlphaTauri team and looking fairly comfortable in front of the Works Red Bull, Sergio Perez in front of him. So Liam Lawson once again showing his quality, even as a rookie in his third Grand Prix of his career. Charles Leclerc on the radio. Charles Leclerc just asking, is Carlos slowing down? And wanting maybe his teammate to just push on a little bit, because Leclerc needs to push on these soft compound tyres a little bit harder. And Leclerc was a couple of tenths of a second quicker than Carlos Sainz last lap. So maybe Ferrari just needs to give Carlos Sainz a bit of a hurry up. But obviously, Carlos Sainz just getting comfortable in first place and holding onto those tyres maybe a little bit longer. Chief Executive Officer of Ferrari there in the garage. I wonder how he feels coming into this weekend where Ferrari look completely ready for action and look like the best chance at a win that they've had, well, at least this season, and including the end of last season as well. Ooh. Pierre Gasly hunting down a point scoring position. Alpine in 11th place. His teammate all the way up in 7th. So Pierre will definitely want to try and hunt down his teammate if possible. Keep himself in contention. Those two on the exact same points in the driver's standings. And there will be no love lost between those two at Alpine, you'd imagine. Hamilton now really pushing as well. Just seeing that gap close to Lando Norris. Now half a second between the Mercedes and the McLaren. So Lewis Hamilton might have a little go here at Lando Norris. Really going for it now, Lewis Hamilton, actually. Just a few tenths every single lap. Couple of tenths every lap now, chunking away at the McLaren's lead. And Lewis Hamilton maybe also gaining because George Russell is fairly slow in front as well. Russell, Norris, and Hamilton all closing in on one another. Just a couple of seconds between them. And DRS for Norris and Hamilton. Leclerc on the radio again. Charles Leclerc really doesn't want to go back towards George Russell again. Ferrari are telling Charles Leclerc to try and get that gap to 3 seconds if they can from Carlos Sainz to just cool everything down. You got to remember, the brakes get so incredibly hot around here. It's one of those tracks that is so heavy on braking. And the tyres start to overheat if you then brake too much and overheat the brakes. If you overheat the tyres, then the thermal degradation increases and the tyres start to go off a lot quicker. It's very much a little puzzle for the drivers to solve as they go around Singapore because of the amount of braking and temperature that they have to deal with throughout this Grand Prix. As we ride on board with Lewis Hamilton, the helmet cam looking absolutely stunning under the lights of Singapore. And all of these guys are continuing on now. It's just so difficult to know where people are going to drop out because there isn't the usual kind of separation of the grid. Normally, there's at least an obvious gap. But Carlos Sainz, if he were to pit right now, he'd come out almost at the back of the pack. He'd come around Albon's Sargent area of the grid. And Charles Leclerc, obviously, on the soft compound tyre, is going to have to pit a lot earlier than everybody else because of that use of the soft compound tyre. And basically, he's going to come out, well, behind Logan Sargent at this rate. Sainz definitely looking very good for a win indeed. Looking very quick at this moment in time, but I feel like just holding on to his tyres, Carlos Sainz, at this point. Especially as Charles Leclerc now a couple of seconds behind the race leader. George Russell is an interesting one. Just doesn't quite seem to have enough to really trouble the Ferraris, but more than enough to keep Lando Norris and Lewis Hamilton at bay. We saw Norris and Hamilton close to within a second of George Russell. And then, you know, after they don't get past, the tyres start to warm up again. Everything starts to overheat. And we're seeing Lando Norris and Lewis Hamilton again backing off the back of George Russell. And I think that's probably what we're seeing with Max Verstappen here. Esteban Ocon in 7th place and Verstappen 1.7 seconds behind. But I think he's just sitting at that distance to just try and maintain everything, cool the car down completely, and make sure that those hard compound tyres last an incredibly long time in comparison to the medium compound tyres of everybody around them. Because we're on board with Max Verstappen now. And obviously, he's, you know, a racing driver. He's driving the car incredibly well, but it doesn't feel like he's pushing the car incredibly hard. And it does feel like if he wanted to, he could probably catch up to the back of Esteban Ocon, but he's leaving that gap and just letting the car cool, letting the brakes cool down that little bit more every lap, and wondering if he's going to go super long on this hard compound tyre. Maybe he's going to hold out for a safety car of some kind. Of course, 12.5 seconds, the gap to Carlos Sainz at this point. So if Verstappen were to stay out and everybody in front of him, Ocon, Alonso, Hamilton, Norris, Russell, Leclerc, were all to pit, then he would come out on top. Charles Leclerc being told again to try and increase that gap to Carlos Sainz, though. And it is 2.5 seconds now, Charles Leclerc. So getting closer to that 3-second target, but just so hard for Charles Leclerc to drop backwards like that, because George Russell, Lando Norris, and Lewis Hamilton are all right there. There is quite the train of cars coming around Singapore. There's no real huge gaps anywhere. Even Kevin Magnussen is only 3 seconds behind Max Verstappen at this point. There's no huge gaps between any of the cars out there at this moment in time. And Alex Albon, who's all the way down in 15th place, is still almost within a pit stop of Carlos Sainz. So Sainz were to pit now, he'd still come out around about Piastri-Albon territory, which is not really where you want to come out if you're leading the Grand Prix. You don't want to drop all the way down to 16th place. It's not really how you'd like it to go. So I feel like Carlos Sainz is going to wait for everybody else to pit early. The undercut, though, feels like it might be right there for a lot of these drivers. George Russell, keep the pressure on the Ferraris, push hard. And George Russell, again, in the hunt for this victory for Mercedes, wants to know from the team what's his best option if he can go on to win this race. He's now 5 seconds off of Carlos Sainz. So again, still well within a pit stop of Carlos Sainz and well within touching distance of the Ferrari. 2019 Singapore Grand Prix, Vettel at 3rd place, undercut Leclerc. That's very true. Yeah, we could see a little bit of an... That's the thing, the undercut. It feels like the undercut should be really, really strong here, but not if you come out into traffic. Like, if Charles Leclerc pitted now, again, as I said, like, he wouldn't come out into free air. He'd come out to, like, Alex Albon just sitting there behind him. But everybody patiently waiting, really. I feel like everybody has got to that point now where they've decided their strategy has been confirmed at this point, and they're just patiently waiting for an opportunity. Who blinks first? Who decides to go into the pits first? The rain forecast, just having a little look. No rain expected. Oh, Zach Brown, though, thinking that there may be a little bit of rain on its way, although it will be incredibly light rain. So unlikely that we'll see the cars have to swap onto the intermediate tyres. Lando Norris's tyres looking good. So Zach Brown, everyone, as he says, kind of eking it out, waiting. Don't want to be the first to blink. Don't want to be the first to go. Everyone's given themselves quite a gap to the car in front now. Yeah, Russell, you'd imagine. I think that's a good shout, GameStar. Like, the undercut. Oh, yellow flag in Sector 2. And there's a Williams in the wall. And it's Logan Sargent. Is he going to be able to get that Williams going again? Yes, he is. Logan Sargent, though, has lost a considerable amount of his front wing. In fact, pretty much his entire front wing. And I imagine that might lead to a little virtual safety car, because there is quite a lot of carbon fibre coming off the front of that Williams. It's just whether or not that carbon fibre has gone into a position where they can get it comfortably. Oh, and yeah, that is a poor mistake from Logan Sargent there. Just goes super wide and bumps the front end of the Williams into the barriers at fairly low speed as well. He is still going to try and get back all the way to the pit lane. You don't know how much damage that front wing is doing to the underside of that Williams car. Sparks are flying underneath that Williams car. Logan Sargent coming around turn 16, 17 now, so is going to be able to get his car all the way back to the pit lane. And the front wing is still trapped underneath the Williams. So, doesn't look like we're going to have any form of virtual safety car or safety car. Oh, no. There it is. The safety car is confirmed. Safety car has dropped. So, lap 20 of the Grand Prix. Logan Sargent has actually made it to the pits. But who goes? Who decides to pit then? You save yourself about 7 or 8 seconds if you pit under a safety car in comparison to pitting under regular circumstances. Here is Logan Sargent coming into the pits then and getting a new front wing. Is anybody else going to blink? Anybody else going to go for a new set of tyres during the safety car? And yes, Carlos Sainz, leader of the Grand Prix, comes into the pits for Ferrari. Russell is also told, box, box. So Charles Leclerc is coming in as well. So Ferrari going to try and double stack this. There was about a 3 or 4 second gap between Leclerc and Sainz, and it looks like they've absolutely nailed it down at Ferrari. Leclerc coming in. And are they going to be able to get Charles Leclerc out in and amongst the traffic? Need to get him out now. He's there. Where's Charles Leclerc? Come back out again. No, Charles Leclerc, no. Is behind Max Verstappen. I don't think came in. And Verstappen has decided to stay out in the Red Bull. So Sainz just about managed to hold on to the lead of this Grand Prix. As we saw the gap between them. Charles Leclerc has dropped all the way back to 6th place, though. Russell and Norris getting the jump on Charles Leclerc. Logan Sargent is being pushed on by the safety car. And that is absolutely perfect for Carlos Sainz. Max Verstappen staying out on the hard compound tyre. And you'd imagine Carlos Sainz is going to try and go all the way to the end on this new set of hards. Charles Leclerc, though, yeah, was held in the pits just because of the amount of traffic that was coming down the pit lane. Because we saw almost everybody deciding to pit. So who didn't? Verstappen, Perez, and Bottas, the only drivers that didn't come into the pits. Ooh! Fernando Alonso. That's going to be a penalty for Fernando Alonso. He locked up coming into the pit lane. He left the pit lane entry and then had to come across the white line once again. So that's a little bit naughty from Fernando Alonso. Traffic. Yeah, Lewis Hamilton was the problem for Charles Leclerc there. Lewis Hamilton was coming into the pits just in front of where the Ferrari pit stop is and had to slow all the way down because George Russell was still there as well. So Leclerc lost out as Hamilton came in. Ooh, crossing the pit lane entry. There you go. Incident involving Fernando Alonso. He locked up, went wide as he came into the pits. Godsend for Verstappen. Yeah, he's in it, is Verstappen. Obviously, right in and amongst it. Just depends how much life these hard compound tyres have still got in them from Verstappen. I don't see him getting past Carlos Sainz. If he does get past Carlos Sainz, then he's probably in contention. But I feel like Carlos Sainz will be able to hold him off a considerable amount. And obviously everybody else has the benefit of pitting under the safety car. Verstappen and Perez are going to have to pit later on in this Grand Prix. And so is Valtteri Bottas, running in 10th place at this moment in time. Nico Hülkenberg, a big loser in that as well. Dropped behind Gasly, Piastri, Lawson. Safety car is ending, and coming in at the end of this lap as we look at Carlos Sainz behind the safety car, weaving around, getting the temperature back into those hard compound tyres. Max Verstappen on 21 lap old hards himself. There's a little bit of debris still on the track, but clearly the stewards saying that that's far enough off the racing line that the cars shouldn't go with it. Sainz won't be able to match Verstappen on the same tyres. The problem is, though, Verstappen's are 20 laps older. I know Verstappen was holding on to his tyres well, but 20 laps is still a considerable chunk of time to have completed on those hard compound tyres. So that's the only thing really running in Carlos Sainz's favour. So the plan for Carlos Sainz to try and keep the pack together. No, Tsunoda did not crash. Tsunoda, well, he did kind of crash. Had a little contact with Sergio Perez and had a puncture in the AlphaTauri and wasn't able to get the AlphaTauri back to the pit lane. So had to pull down one of the escape roads. And then once he was down there, the car came to a stop. So Yuki Tsunoda out of this one. Lance Stroll, of course, not taking part in this Singapore Grand Prix after his crash in qualifying yesterday. And the safety car is in. The green flag is waved. And Carlos Sainz will get us back underway again as soon as he launches off. Max Verstappen waiting in anticipation to try and get behind the Ferrari and put Carlos Sainz under pressure if he can. But Carlos Sainz, a really good launch from the Ferrari, ekes out a bit of a gap over Max Verstappen straight away. George Russell then under pressure from Sergio Perez. Lando Norris is now in 5th place just behind. Leclerc, the big loser, in 6th. Hamilton 7th. Alonso in 8th place, although will probably pick up a penalty with Fernando Alonso for going across the pit lane entry. Esteban Ocon and Valtteri Bottas rounding out the points. The safety car was caused by Logan Sargent losing his front wing. And everyone having a little look. And Charles Leclerc almost collected there. And Leclerc ends up losing a place to Lewis Hamilton, I think, because... Oh, Fernando Alonso, there it is, the 5-second penalty. So Leclerc, the battle between Norris and Perez in front almost collected Charles Leclerc. And Perez is sliding all over the place under pressure from George Russell. Oh, no, that's Max Verstappen, sorry. Max Verstappen all over the place under pressure from George Russell. Although George Russell also not allowing Sergio Perez to get past. Everybody trying to battle between them. And here goes George Russell on Lando. Go on, Lando. No. Lando Norris battling with Perez. George Russell battling with Verstappen. And Perez is going to have a little bit of a battle with Lando again. And George Russell's going to go up the inside. And Hamilton's going to try and go up the inside of Perez as well. It's crazy. There's so much happening. So George Russell gets back in front of Max Verstappen. Lando Norris also jumps in front of Sergio Perez, who then managed to close the door on Lewis Hamilton, who stays in 6th. Perez darts over to the inside of the track, defending from Lewis Hamilton behind. Charles Leclerc looking to overtake and can't this time either. Valtteri Bottas losing positions hand over fist right now. As you can see, Magnussen, Gasly, Piastri, Hülkenberg, Albon, Bottas falling all the way down. There must have been something going wrong with Bottas. He's just falling back way too quickly. And Lewis Hamilton trying to go around the outside of Sergio Perez. And does. Lewis Hamilton back up into 5th place. Sergio Perez just all over the place on those hard compound tyres. As I said, just 20 laps is a lot of laps on a hard set of compound tyres. And they are really struggling with grip now. Russell and Hamilton definitely in for the win. Lando Norris as well right now, looking incredibly quick on those fresh hard compound tyres. And George Russell is going to be looking towards the back of the pack. And Lando Norris now makes a move on Max Verstappen. And Lando Norris moves back up to the podium positions. With Charles Leclerc losing out, Max Verstappen dropping all the way backwards. And Lando Norris jumping up into his podium position. Sainz, Russell, Norris now our top three. Verstappen struggling in that Red Bull. And next up for Max Verstappen is Lewis Hamilton. And he would absolutely love to take the position from Max Verstappen. DRS now enabled for Lewis Hamilton as well. Charles Leclerc now staring at the back of Sergio Perez as well. And the Red Bulls, okay, they stayed out and went longer on those tyres. Sainz being told just to keep George Russell at bay, but not push too hard. Try and stop them from going for the two-stop strategy. Oh, and Charles Leclerc almost into the back of Lando Norris there. I think he was just trying to sneak round. And the gap very quickly closed for Charles Leclerc, and that meant that he lost another position to Lewis Hamilton as well. But Hamilton and Leclerc now back behind Max Verstappen. Well, was Charles lost positions at the start? No, Charles Leclerc lost positions during the safety car pit stop. Unfortunately, Lewis Hamilton came in just at the wrong time for Charles Leclerc. And Ferrari couldn't release him from the pit box because Hamilton was coming into the pit box just in front of the Ferrari car. And that meant that Leclerc had to wait a little bit longer. And that meant he lost out to Norris and Russell. Sergio Perez, Hamilton went off the track. And Sergio Perez thinks that he should have had that position back, but Charles Leclerc has now taken that position anyway. So Hamilton is going to have to go to the stewards once again. Yeah, Kevin Magnussen doing great work in front of Pierre Gasly in 10th place right now for the Haas team. Ferrari pit wall, meme sweating profusely. Yeah, they're going for it, Ferrari, this weekend. They did, unfortunately. Charles Leclerc just got very unfortunate with that. If Hamilton hadn't have pitted, then Charles Leclerc would have stayed out in front and would be in second place. But that is the problem. Everyone came in for the pits all at the same time. There was traffic for Charles Leclerc. And then he lost another position to Lewis Hamilton because he went for a crazy move on Lando Norris. George Russell, though, sensing that there's an opportunity for another win in Formula One. Obviously got his first win at Brazil 2022. He'd love to add Singapore to that list. And George Russell all over the rear wing of the Ferrari of Carlos Sainz. But Carlos Sainz doesn't want to extend his lead too much. Maybe just trying to keep George Russell actually at bay, but in the dirty air and scrub those tyres a little bit more. Ferrari were indeed, 1-2 before the pits. Whatever the result, would have taken a gamble. Not stopping under the safety car, otherwise he would have been fighting the back markers all day. That is very true. I mean, Verstappen, I think, has done the right thing. I just think the problem is the gaps between the cars in the field is going to not edge itself out enough for Verstappen to really become a contender in this race. So let's have a look. 6 seconds behind Carlos Sainz now, Verstappen. So you imagine add that 20 seconds or so for a pit stop. We're going all the way down to 26 seconds, which means he comes out behind Valtteri Bottas right now if he were to pit. Max Verstappen. Black and white flag for Kevin Magnussen, forcing a car off of the track. So Kevin Magnussen and the battle with Esteban Ocon. And there's Lewis Hamilton moving past Verstappen. And a very, very tidy little move from Lewis. Takes 4th place from Max Verstappen. And will push with the Mercedes to try and catch the back of Lando Norris. And a possible podium finish. Charles Leclerc now half a second behind Max Verstappen. And everyone just trying to get Max Verstappen out of the way. Become a little bit of a headache for some of these cars fighting for the podium positions today. And they're hoping, obviously, that the hard compound tyre will go really, really long and they'll be able to do some kind of incredible pit stop. And another safety car. That's very true. Another safety car would be at least the best that Red Bull could hope for, I think. Hamilton faster than Lando? Yeah, definitely so, because he's in the free air now, been released from behind Max Verstappen. A little bit of free air for Lewis Hamilton, although Norris in a bit of free air as well. But on this hard compound tyre, the Mercedes car does go quite well on the hard compound tyre, it has to be said. And Charles Leclerc is going to get past Max Verstappen up into 5th place. And Leclerc will now try and fight back to the podium where he was before the safety car. Unfortunately, was one of the big losers from the safety car incident. But there wasn't too much that Charles Leclerc could have done. He couldn't really have gone any longer because he was on the soft compound tyre, remember, Charles Leclerc. So he was the one desperate to go into the pits as soon as possible. But Verstappen and Perez in 6th and 7th place now. And they are the only two not to have stopped. I assume Valtteri Bottas did stop. No, Valtteri Bottas hasn't stopped. Valtteri Bottas is very slow for some reason. There must have been a problem at some point. He's just falling through the field. It felt like every corner he was losing a position. Sergio Perez pushing in front of Fernando Alonso. Alonso with a 5-second penalty for going out of the pit lane, crossed the pit lines, and unfortunately, and Fernando Alonso darting off the track. And George Russell managing a lot, very slow, says George Russell about Carlos Sainz. And Ferrari have indeed said to Carlos that he can drop back a little bit. Just hold up George Russell, make sure that they can't go for any kind of two-stop strategy. And Fernando Alonso all over. Esteban Ocon all over Fernando Alonso. And Alonso actually with quite a train of cars behind. Alonso, Ocon, Magnussen, Gasly, Piastri, Lawson, all within DRS of one another. Hulkenberg only just a second off the back of Lawson as well. So this entire pack of cars all together. And this is why you don't really want to pit now if you're Max Verstappen, because you come out behind all of this. You've got all of this to contend with once again. Whereas Max Verstappen right now got a couple of seconds gap to Charles Leclerc, can at least push those hard compound tyres a little bit harder. Although looking at the lap times, Charles Leclerc absolutely flying a 139.5 to Max Verstappen's 141.4 last time around. Yeah, Fernando Alonso probably hoping that his teammate would have binned it today. We've seen that happen before with Fernando Alonso and some teammate drama in Singapore, but less said about that, the better. So let's have a think about this then. Verstappen and Perez are both going to drop out of the points positions when they pit, you'd imagine. And then puts Alonso and Ocon up, puts Magnussen into the points, puts Gasly into the points, Piastri also within touching distance, Lawson within a few seconds of a point scoring finish as well, once the Red Bulls do drop backwards. And George Russell George Russell holding onto the tyres, says that these tyres will go to the end of the race easily, especially with how much Carlos Sainz is managing his tyres. So maybe Russell just waiting for an opportunity to strike. Doesn't want to push the tyres right now, George Russell, because again, it's a little bit of a chess game. If there is another safety car, if there is another opportunity to pit, George Russell doesn't want to just kill these tyres completely, because maybe Sainz pits, Russell doesn't, depending on how late that safety car comes into fruition. But Sainz, Russell, Norris still are top three, and Norris actually closing in on Russell quite considerably. Hamilton also closing in on Norris too. And Norris finds himself in a little bit of a Mercedes sandwich right now. Charles Leclerc also pushing on those tyres in the Ferrari, although 2.5 seconds now off the back of Lewis Hamilton. Max Verstappen in 6th place is again 7-8 seconds off the lead of the Grand Prix. So it's falling away once again, Max Verstappen, and is going to have to pit at some point. Obviously, everybody else can go to the end of the Grand Prix. Verstappen, Perez, and Bottas are the ones that need to come in. Interestingly, Zhou Guanyu, who could have stayed out on the hard compound tyre, had already done one pit stop, decided to also come in. So has done a second pit stop, has Zhou Guanyu, under the safety car. That's an interesting one for me. I didn't think that they would bother with doing that as we hit the halfway point of this Grand Prix. There is quite a chunk of Verstappen on the radio. And Verstappen really struggling with grip now. Driving on ice. The quote from Max Verstappen. Just no front end grip. You can see that Red Bull again struggling. They've struggled with that all weekend. Just no front end grip at all. Sainz has a dilemma. Increase the gap or manage the tyres. I don't think he does. I think he does manage the tyres here, Carlos Sainz. I think you play the closing the gap kind of thing, because you don't really want to give anybody the option to pit again. By keeping the field nice and tight, Carlos Sainz basically forces Russell to stay out with him. And if they are both just holding onto their tyres, I think Carlos Sainz just backs himself to be able to keep in front on the same set of tyres that they've both been holding onto for the Grand Prix. Whereas right now, basically, because he's keeping Leclerc and Verstappen and Perez all within kind of touching distance of a pit stop, if George Russell were to pit and try and do something spectacular at the end of the race and cut his way through the field, then it becomes a little bit trickier for him, because he's going to come out in quite a few more cars rather than just maybe the one or two that he would battle through at the front. The humid air help the engine cooling. Not really, no, just because the air temperature itself is so much higher. I know that the water vapor coming in takes a little bit of the heat away, but water's got a really high specific heat capacity. So water is actually really difficult to heat up. So it doesn't actually help too much as it comes across the top of the engine. Ooh. Alonso with a 5-second penalty is an interesting one, though, because Alonso would drop way behind the Traffel. George Russell again on the radio, wanting to know what can he do to win. I'm sure Mercedes are trying their best, George. I don't imagine they don't want you to win. But George Russell really hungry for an opportunity at a victory this year. He knows that this might be the only chance. Because again, when we get to Japan, you'd imagine Red Bull will have sorted out whatever was going wrong here in Singapore. The Japanese track suits the Red Bull car a little bit better. Do I have an engineering background? Kind of. Ish. Not specifically car related or anything like that. Let's have a look then. I was trying to work out. Alonso would drop behind Ocon, drop behind Magnussen, drop behind Gasly, drop behind Piastri, drop behind Lawson. So actually, Alonso at this moment in time is effectively 13th. Ouch. That 5-second penalty dramatically changes this race for Fernando Alonso. At some point, he's going to have to push. But the problem is he's being held up by Sergio Perez. The real gap is the Red Bulls. Like, we saw pretty much everyone within a couple of seconds of each other before the safety car incident. Verstappen and Perez now really eking out. Verstappen 5.5 seconds behind Charles Leclerc. Perez another 3.5 seconds behind that still. So Verstappen now 10 seconds off the lead. Perez 14 seconds off the lead. So Carlos Sainz could almost pit again and still come out in front of Max Verstappen, but Verstappen hasn't pitted yet. This is looking really bad for Red Bull. They need a red flag. They need a red flag so they can come in and get a free pit stop. Although, if you change tyres under a red flag, does that count as your mandatory pit stop? You have changed tyres. Gasly still putting Magnussen under pressure, but still very frustrated at the fact that Kevin Magnussen kind of pushed him off the track. The Alpine got a black and white flag, but no reprimand for Magnussen in terms of Gasly getting past. Pierre, though, within half a second, and maybe the tyres of that Haas car just falling away a little bit. Leclerc will be the saddest lad today after the race. The problem was, there wasn't too much that he could really do about it. It was just how it was. Lewis came in. Lewis pitted. He had to wait for Lewis to come in. Otherwise, it would have been an unsafe release. And then instead of dropping behind the guys, he'd have just had a 5-second penalty at the end. And then he'd have dropped behind them at the end anyway. Because look, everyone's within a second of each other at that start of the field. So if you look, Charles Leclerc is within 5 seconds of the lead. So he would have just lost those positions anyway. Max won't be sad, he'll be furious. It's very true, very, very true. Yeah, that's what I thought. The red flag would be perfect for the Red Bulls, but that's about all that they can hope for. Otherwise, I think we could be looking at both Red Bulls finishing outside of the points. They're going to have to do some incredible work. Ooh. And Pierre Gasly is gonna be... Oh no, he has given that position back to Kevin Magnussen. Gasly getting a little bit hot-headed. Ooh. Sergio Perez with a proper slide of oversteer there. Wow. And Verstappen and Perez, well, you can see Verstappen was spot on, like driving on ice indeed. Fernando Alonso, though, still behind Sergio Perez and not able to get past the Red Bull. It must be so frustrating for Fernando Alonso, especially because he's got that 5-second penalty now. Although, luckily, Kevin Magnussen doing a really good job at just holding up the rest of the pack behind and allowing Alonso now to be in contention for points once again. Kevin Magnussen falling off a cliff. And again, Pierre Gasly pushing Kevin Magnussen. And Kevin Magnussen maybe, I think, struggling with those tyres just way too much, falling all the way back. And, oh, Magnussen just losing position after position. Gasly, Piastri, Lawson, Hulkenberg, and now Albon all go past Kevin Magnussen. Incident involving Gasly and Magnussen noted. Forcing another driver off the track is going to be investigated. But what a poor lap from Kevin Magnussen that was. Just completely fell off a cliff, his tyres. And now went from 10th place ahead of Pierre Gasly to 15th place Kevin Magnussen within the blink of an eye. Oh, yeah, just goes super deep, does Kevin Magnussen into turn 1. Tries to come back, obviously, around turn 3. And Kevin Magnussen. Oh, down in turn 7 it was as well. Wow. Yeah, completely locked up. Went really wide, did Kevin Magnussen. And is now just falling off a cliff with those Haas tyres. Fernando Alonso now striking on Sergio Perez as well. And Fernando Alonso finally gets in front. No, Sergio Perez gets back in front once again. And Ocon smells blood. Ocon tries to get in front of Fernando Alonso. They're going to be almost 3 abreast. Perez, Alonso, and Ocon all going around this middle sector, holding on together. Ocon, I think, is going to jump in front of Fernando Alonso, although Sergio Perez is going to hold on to the lead of the 3. And Alonso was so close to getting in front of Sergio Perez, but instead lost a position to Esteban Ocon. Esteban Ocon going side by side with Fernando Alonso. That was so close, within millimeters of taking one another out. Perfect driving from the both of them. Wow. Will be a good result for Perez. He's got a pit still, lads. He's going to come out right at the back of the pack if he pits. Pierre Gasly has been released as well from Kevin Magnussen. Is right behind this pack. Wow. Sergio Perez holding up this. Carlos Sainz wants to know when he can be released. When can I push on these tyres? We've been holding up the pack for a long time now, but we can see that Max Verstappen is 12 seconds off the back. Sergio Perez 20 seconds now off the lead of this Grand Prix. So Carlos Sainz feels like now might be the time to try and push on these hard compound tyres. They are 17 laps old. We might see a lot of drivers go for a 2-stop strategy here, because it does seem like, well, we can see from Sergio Perez's car that as soon as those hard compound tyres do go, they do fall off a little bit. But then I suppose everyone is on the hard compound tyre, so everyone's kind of in the same situation. Would Sainz be thinking right now, will he be nervous about Russell behind? I'm not so sure. I think Carlos Sainz still is fairly happy with the way that he's managed his tyres. And Sainz is just going to back off enough to keep George Russell within Lando Norris range. Wow, George Russell, again with the fighting talk on Carlos Sainz. I think he wants Carlos Sainz to push a little bit, does George Russell. And we see the Red Bull garage preparing some tyres. Is it going to be now that Verstappen or Perez decide to come in and change? They're going to have a hell of an afternoon on their hands, will the Verstappen and Perez. They will probably be able to fight their way through the field, but it's going to be very exciting to watch as they try and sieve their way back through the pack again. Both Red Bull cars, obviously, pit stops 20-something odd seconds, 26, 27 seconds, something like that. So, like, even if Carlos Sainz pitted, he'd still come out around Lawson, Hulkenberg, Albon, that kind of area. Esteban Ocon now having a look at Sergio Perez. And is going to have a go. Go on, Esteban. Try and have a go at turn 8. Nope. Squeezes him. And then really clever from Esteban Ocon right up the inside. That was a very nice move from Esteban Ocon there. Just made Sergio Perez go a little bit deeper into the corner, took the shallower line through the corner, and Ocon takes 7th place and will now be released. This is where I'm interested. Let's have a little look at Esteban Ocon versus Max Verstappen's lap times. So Verstappen in 6th place on a hard compound tyre set that he's had since the beginning of the Grand Prix. And then Esteban Ocon behind in 7th place on a slightly fresher set of softs by about 20 laps or so. Alonso also now taking the position. And Pierre Gasly is going to take a position from Sergio Perez as well. Sergio Perez has dropped off a cliff now. Has to be box for Sergio Perez, and it is indeed. Some fresh tyres needed for that Red Bull. Sergio Perez just became a sitting duck at that point. Lost out to Ocon, Alonso and Gasly before then coming into the pits. Piastri, Lawson, Hulkenberg, Albon, Joe go screaming past. Sergio Perez only just comes to a stop. And he's going to come back out all the way at the back. But a fresh set of medium tyres on Sergio Perez's car. And we'll see. Is that Logan Sargent coming past? It is indeed. So Sergio Perez right at the back. What can he do from there? 22 laps, 23 laps left for Sergio Perez. And basically an opportunity for him to make as many overtakes as he possibly can. And Max Verstappen is also going to box as well. Because, yeah, Esteban Ocon was making up nearly a second a lap there. Or at least was looking like he was going to make up a second a lap or so. So Verstappen comes in as well. Verstappen is going to come out just ahead of his teammate. Maybe just ahead of Logan Sargent. Yeah, just about ahead of Logan Sargent. So Max Verstappen's going to come out around about 16th, 17th as well. And again, he's going to have the same task on his hands. Fresh set of tyres. Max, push as hard as you can. How many overtakes can you make in the final few laps of this Grand Prix? Ooh. Max Verstappen almost loses it on the way to the pits. Properly sliding around that Red Bull car. Max Verstappen not in any way happy with the setup this weekend. You can see why. Fresh set of medium tyres go on. 3-second pit stop from the Red Bull team as we see Hulkenberg and Albon going down the pit straight. Joe as well, as Max Verstappen is now going to be exiting the pits. Valtteri Bottas has come into the pits as well, behind in 16th place. But there is Max Verstappen ahead of a Logan Sargent. And 15th is where Verstappen starts his final stint. 22 laps. Let's see what Verstappen can do. First up, Kevin Magnussen in 14th place, although he is 6 seconds ahead. So Max Verstappen going to have to put in a few laps before he catches up to Kevin Magnussen, you'd imagine. George Russell still all over the back of Carlos Sainz, still trying to push Carlos Sainz to just actually unleash the pace of that Ferrari. Do they decide now is the time? Because obviously now the Red Bulls have pitted. If there was a red flag or a safety car, it's not like the Red Bulls gain a huge advantage anymore because they're at 15th and 17th place. And you'd imagine that the Ferraris are going to release them now. The only thing that does save Max Verstappen's race, I think, is a safety car. Because obviously everyone else would probably want to pit, where Verstappen could probably stay out a little bit longer. Well, would stay out. Wouldn't come in for the pits. Lawson in the points. Oh, yeah, that completely went under my radar. 10th place, Liam Lawson. Take a bow. Oscar Piastri also up 8 positions from the beginning of the Grand Prix as well. So Piastri doing really well to get back into the points in that McLaren. The other McLaren of Lando Norris within half a second of George Russell. And again, this top 3 really keeping themselves closely packed together. Lewis Hamilton also only a second and a half off of Lando Norris, and then another second or so to Charles Leclerc in 5th. So this top 5 all coming around together. Esteban Ocon then 20 seconds off of Charles Leclerc. So it is a real top 5 right now. Fernando Alonso on the radio. This is undrivable. Struggling incredibly hard then, Fernando Alonso. It's not often that you hear him so incredibly negative, especially this season where he's been very, very positive about the Aston Martin car and the Aston Martin team, even when they have had tough weekends. But this is undrivable, says Fernando Alonso in 7th place, obviously with that 5-second penalty as well. So Alonso would drop behind Gasly and Piastri and Lawson as well at this moment in time. Russell is given the go-ahead then and is asked to push the Ferrari a little bit harder. So Russell is going to unleash a little bit more pace behind Carlos Sainz in 1st place. Made up a 10th of a second last lap to George Russell. See what you can do now. Oscar Piastri. Esteban Ocon. What's happened? Why is Ocon dropping down? Oh, and he's come to a stop. In sector 1 and the inside of turn 2. And I think that's going to be a safety car. And Esteban Ocon on the radio. Oh, that is the end of that Alpine. It looks like it's overheated in some way or another. Come to an end, Esteban Ocon's race. I saw him just dropping down the order. And I thought, that can't be right because he's got so much pace this weekend. But now the safety car is going to come out. So let's have a little look then. Fernando Alonso is 28 seconds behind the leaders. So if Carlos Sainz were to pit under a safety car, he would come out in 5th place. I feel like this top 5 can get away with coming in. Virtual safety car is the call from the FIA. Virtual safety car, not a full safety car at this moment in time. But it's right at the pit entry is Esteban Ocon. I don't know whether this might end up being a full safety car here because Esteban Ocon is right on the entry of the pit lane at turn 2. And Ocon very frustrated indeed. Jumping out of that Alpine. Virtual safety car. Albon is coming in. Just Alex Albon deciding to come in. That's really annoying for Esteban Ocon. He'd been doing really, really well. Really, really good race from Esteban Ocon. And had had a really good battle with Fernando Alonso and Sergio Perez that he'd come out on top of as well. He was right behind the top 5. He was running in 6th place, looking for some really solid points. And yeah, just completely loses power down towards turn 1. And tries to coast to a stop. Oh, that is so frustrating. And Esteban Ocon hits the wheel in frustration. And you can understand why. He's driven so hard and so well. But the virtual safety car comes into play. Max Verstappen now up into 12th place. Albon decided to come into the pits. Russell on the radio. Sainz driving unnecessarily slowly. Unnecessarily slowly on Carlos Sainz. And Russell's coming in. Russell's coming in. And Lewis Hamilton coming in. So Mercedes have decided to go all out, fresh tyres for the 2 Mercedes cars. Pinpoint precision and a good stop from George Russell means that Hamilton wasn't hanging around too long. And both of the Mercedes pit. Where is Fernando Alonso is the question. No, they're going to get out. Yep, comfortably in front. 15-second pit stop under the virtual safety car is around about what you lose to the cars behind. So very easily out in front. Fernando Alonso also came in, I think. Yeah, Fernando Alonso into the pits as well. Releases Pierre Gasly, who is now best of the rest in 6th place. And a 5-second penalty, of course, for Fernando Alonso, which he serves, stops, soft tyres. Oh. And they didn't get that. Oh, it's an absolutely tragic pit stop. The rear tyres aren't on. They dropped the jack and the rear tyre wasn't on properly. That is an absolutely horrible pit stop for Fernando Alonso. 25 seconds he was stationary. I know he had the 5-second penalty in there, but the green flag drops and Fernando Alonso is going to be all the way down towards the back of the pack. Max Verstappen now 11th place. But 2 Mercedes have now got some fresh tyres on them. George Russell and Lewis Hamilton are going to go for it. Ooh. Charles Leclerc staying out and happy to stay out as well. So that means Sainz, Norris and Leclerc on the hard compound tyre. And now we have Russell and Hamilton that are going to be on fresh sets of medium tyres and hunting down the top 3 as fast as they can. Let's take a little look at George Russell's lap times once the virtual safety car lap times disappear. Pierre Gasly in 6th place now. Piastri, Lawson in 8th place. Hulkenberg and Zhou up into the points as well. Love that from Zhou Guanyu. Obviously confirmed to be with the Sauber team next season. And possibly another points finish for Zhou Guanyu on the cars. 5 points finishes in his career so far. Could make it 6. Ferrari should have pitted. It's such a tough call. I feel like they should have done one and the other, maybe. Maybe one and the other. Like Sainz pits, Charles Leclerc stays out. But, I mean, Carlos Sainz has been holding onto these tyres for an incredibly long time. So we'll have to see how much pace he has actually held on to over the course of this Grand Prix. He said he was holding on to about a second's worth of pace. Now he's going to have to actually show that he was holding on to a second's worth of pace. Norris, an interesting one. I thought Norris would have pitted, but Mercedes have played the game a little bit different. I feel like if Lando Norris pitted, he knows that he's going to definitely come behind George Russell. So maybe he's just playing a little bit of a gamble that he might be able to stick ahead of George Russell and plant his McLaren on enough apexes that George Russell will struggle to get by. Russell, fastest lap of the Grand Prix. A 36.2. That is a second and a half quicker than Carlos Sainz's pace. So that means he's going to be right with them in like 7 laps time. Wow, George Russell has completely nailed this. If he can keep up that kind of lap time, 2 seconds quicker than Charles Leclerc. Yellow flag, sector 3. Yellow flag, sector 3. Fernando Alonso's dropping down the order, and that is an Aston Martin that has driven straight on at turn 14. Manages to get going again, though, Fernando Alonso. And honestly, this today it's just fallen apart for Fernando Alonso. Just an absolutely terrible race from the Spaniard. Max Verstappen now in 11th place. Zhou Guanyu in front. Zhou Guanyu as well on medium tyres that have been out as long as some of the hard runners. 26 laps Zhou Guanyu has done on those medium tyres. So Verstappen should be able to jump in front of that Alfa Romeo fairly comfortably. But is holding his own, Zhou Guanyu. Just putting the Italian flag of the Alfa Romeo in front. And there goes Verstappen then up the inside. And makes the position Zhou Guanyu down into 11th place. And Verstappen up into the points. And Lewis Hamilton absolutely flying as well. George Russell and Lewis Hamilton now flying. And George Russell should be within striking distance of Charles Leclerc in 5 laps a time. There's still 15 laps of this Grand Prix left to go. Carlos Sainz might be under pressure here. Come on, Carlos. Let's see what you can do. Alonso all saying Singapore is the weekend, but is having a stinker. Yeah, it's just absolutely falling apart. Turn 14 just had to actually stop and go into reverse, did Fernando Alonso. Just couldn't get the car to actually go round turn 14. And instead went down the little escape road that is there. Oh, Sainz on the radio. Carlos Sainz asks, is the pace good enough? Ferrari need more pace if you can. So, Carlos Sainz, get a wiggle on. Let's see what you've really got in that Ferrari car, but don't kill your hard compound tyres too much. Max Verstappen now right behind Nico Hülkenberg in the Haas, who has managed to move his Haas up into the points positions, but Max Verstappen's going to make fairly light work of Nico Hülkenberg. Now a little bit of a gap, though, for Max Verstappen. 4.5 seconds to Liam Lawson, who is in 8th place, although I can't imagine Liam Lawson putting up too much of a fight with a Max Verstappen coming up behind him. So Sainz, Norris, Leclerc, our top 3, will soon be under pressure from George Russell. And Liam Lawson is driving so well. We're on board with him now. Going pretty well. Obviously, nowhere near the pace of Max Verstappen behind. And Verstappen will be behind Liam Lawson within a couple of laps or so. But Liam Lawson holding on to points in what is the most difficult Grand Prix on the calendar. The drivers constantly say that Singapore is the most difficult challenge. And Liam Lawson holding on so incredibly well. Sainz, Norris, Leclerc, Russell, Hamilton, our top 5. Gasly, Piastri, Lawson, Verstappen and Hülkenberg, our point scorers. Joe, Albon, Perez, Magnussen, Bottas, Sargent and Alonso still in the hunt. Esteban Ocon and Yuki Tsunoda out of the Grand Prix, with Lance Stroll, who did not start this weekend in Singapore after his crash yesterday in qualifying. We do indeed have Carlando 1 and 2 right now, Josh, but it's gonna be difficult for them to hold on to because Charles Leclerc is gonna be under pressure from George Russell, I'd say within the next 2-3 laps, because George Russell 2 seconds quicker, 1.9, 1.8, 1.8. He is cutting the gap to the Ferrari in front, hand after fist, and I just don't think the Ferrari is going to have anything that he's going to be able to defend with. Like, what is Charles Leclerc supposed to do with that? The Mercedes car just absolutely rinsing time out of the cars in front. Sainz 1.7 slower than Russell. That's what I mean. Just like every single lap, Russell is 2 seconds or so quicker than all 3 of the cars in front. Carlos Sainz doing the best of the 3 at the moment. Lando Norris last lap just a little touch quicker than Carlos Sainz, but Charles Leclerc is struggling and will be caught very quickly. There is Liam Lawson with Max Verstappen just behind. As I said, going to take Verstappen a couple of laps to catch up to Liam Lawson. Those couple of laps have gone. And Liam Lawson now under pressure from the Red Bull World Champion. And I don't imagine we'll hold up Max Verstappen for too long. Lawson looks in his mirrors and doesn't let Max Verstappen by as quickly as I thought he was going to. And Lawson putting on a little bit of a challenge here for Max Verstappen. Go on, Liam. No, he hasn't got the pace to hold on to it for that long. Verstappen takes 8th place from Liam Lawson. Didn't make it easy. Didn't make it ridiculously hard either. But Liam Lawson with some good defending there for a couple of corners. And now 6 seconds the gap from Verstappen to Piastri. And again, it is just how many can you make up? 12 laps left to go for Verstappen. I reckon he could get up to about Gasly. Whether he'll be able to get in front of the Alpine is a different question. George Russell now 9 seconds off the lead of the Grand Prix. 3 seconds off the back of Charles Leclerc. Charles Leclerc should pit for softs now. I think it's too late. You'd have to be so quick. You'd have to be like 4 or 5 seconds quicker every single lap to be able to get back up to where he is. But some really, really good pace from George Russell. 1.4 seconds was chunked away from George Russell there at that last lap. 12 laps left to go. And Lewis Hamilton actually even quicker than Russell. So the Mercedes cars are going to have to go for something. Let's see then what George Russell can do, especially when if George Russell can get within a second of Charles Leclerc, I just can't see a way in which Charles Leclerc can defend from him. Like, what is he supposed to do? The Mercedes car just got more grip, faster tyres, and has the tyre advantage in terms of life as well. 31 laps Charles Leclerc's tyres have done to 7 George Russell's. And another 2 seconds taken out. So here we are then. I said we've got about 10 laps left to go. 10 laps left to go it will be. And George Russell will be within striking distance. Sergio Perez, an interesting one. Stuck behind Alex Albon. And Alex Albon actually on fresher tyres than Sergio Perez. So Perez is all but done in 13th place, so no points for Perez this weekend. And Toto Wolff looks on. Fred Vasseur stares at the lap times. One decided to pit, one did not. And Charles Leclerc now under pressure from George Russell. We'll be able to see George Russell with DRS open as well. And the DRS wide open as we go to lap 53 of the Grand Prix. Here it is then. George Russell is going to be all over the rear wing of Charles Leclerc. It's just how long can Charles Leclerc realistically hold on for? A lap? Maybe 2? Would be the absolute dream for Carlos Sainz if his teammate could do him a favour here. And George Russell having a little look, but just runs out of laps there. Just runs out of track there, sorry. Charles Leclerc now is going to have to do some defending. Oh, yellow flag in Sector 3. Nope, green flag, okay. Don't know who that was for or what that was for. Maybe Valtteri Bottas? Dropped a position. Yeah, dropped a couple of positions. Valtteri Bottas. I think Bottas might have gone off at somewhere. But George Russell right underneath the rear wing of Charles Leclerc. Is going to go for it. George Russell around the outside. Nope. Leclerc forces him to go the long way around. George Russell's going to have the extra traction. And George Russell's going to make it count. And gets ahead of Charles Leclerc. Leclerc's going to try and have a little bit of a fight back. But George Russell's just going to have so much more grip going into these final sector corners. And Hamilton is right there as well as they come around the final couple of corners all together. Lewis Hamilton, obviously, with DRS, but Charles Leclerc with DRS as well now. And let's see, George Russell, 6.6 seconds behind Lando Norris with 9 laps left to go. Lewis Hamilton now going to be right behind Charles Leclerc as well. The Ferrari trying to hold on for as many points as possible, but he's not going to be able to hold on as Lewis Hamilton goes in and gets the job done. Hamilton up into 4th place as well, and Russell and Hamilton running an absolute train on these drivers as they come towards the top 5. Leclerc dispatched Norris next. 6.2 seconds now the gap between Norris and George Russell. 7.8 to cover indeed from George Russell at this moment in time. Now down to 7.3. 8 laps left to go. Norris is indeed. Norris is the real one. I think Carlos might just have enough of a gap, depending on how these hard tyres fare in the next few. But Norris is under some real pressure right now. Max Verstappen also putting Oscar Piastri under a lot of pressure too. Again, 20 laps younger medium tyres than Oscar Piastri does Max Verstappen. It's not going to make it easy, but Piastri can't hold up Verstappen for too much longer. Verstappen goes up into 7th place. But a long way off of even George Russell and Lewis Hamilton, who look to be hunting down Lando Norris together now. The gap down to 5.2 seconds, an entire second chunked out of that from George Russell already. Hamilton being told to push on the radio. They've got to give it all that they can. Hamilton asking on the radio if the podium is still there for him. And the team think that it is. So, George Russell, 4.5 seconds. And you can see George Russell there in the background as we watch Carlos Sainz and Lando Norris together at the start of this final few laps in Singapore. Gasly still in 6th place. Verstappen 3.3 seconds behind him as well. So Verstappen might be able to get himself into the top 6 before the end of this Grand Prix, especially with Gasly's tyres being a lot older than Verstappen's. Liam Lawson is also going to be under pressure from Alex Albon, although I just really hope Liam Lawson can hold on to that. Striking distance is expected to be 3 laps, George Russell. So 7 laps left, 3 laps to catch Lando Norris. But then Lando Norris is only a second behind Sainz. So if you catch Norris, you basically catch Sainz. Sainz, Norris, Russell, Hamilton, Leclerc are top 5 at this point still. Yeah, it's going to be a difficult one, isn't it? Verstappen was really struggling on those hard compound tyres, and Carlos Sainz is now even further in. Can't see him keeping Russell behind at the end of the race. It's going to be so tight. It's going to be so tight. But George Russell, I think Mercedes might have done some magic here. I said at the start of the Grand Prix, if you're going to trust one of these two teams to get the strategy right, Mercedes is always the one. Mercedes versus Ferrari. Which team is going to get it right in terms of strategy? You just feel it's always going to be Mercedes over Ferrari. And Russell now 2.6 seconds off of Lando Norris. You have to remember these medium tyres are going to go off a little bit as well. Not as much as the hard compound tyres have. But Carlos Sainz has been holding on to those hard compound tyres and working his best. Gap to Lando every lap. Carlos Sainz wants to know what he needs to do. How much can he push? What can he do to keep this lead? The second race victory is on the line. It's either going to be Carlos Sainz's second victory at Ferrari or George Russell's second victory at Mercedes is gonna go down to the final lap and the wire. It couldn't be closer between these two. Carlos Sainz a second ahead of Lando Norris. 2 seconds the gap to George Russell, but he was 1.4 seconds faster than than Lando Norris last lap. 5 laps left to go once they come across the start-finish line. A pity McLaren didn't gamble. I say yes, but then Norris would still be behind Russell. But then I suppose he would be ahead of Hamilton. So, depends how you want to sort of see it from Norris's perspective. Verstappen has managed to catch up to Gasly, as I expected. And I imagine we'll be able to get in front of Gasly within the next 5 laps or so. George Russell now nearly within DRS of Lando Norris. Lando Norris also within DRS of Carlos Sainz. So this is going to get very interesting indeed as these three battle it out for the lead. And Lewis Hamilton is going to be there to pick up any scraps that are going. Verstappen trying to get past Gasly. Down towards turn 14. Is he going to go around the outside? He is indeed. And Verstappen does get it done and holds on to 6th place. Last lap, Lando Norris 2.5 tenths quicker than Carlos Sainz. Nearly 3 tenths quicker than Carlos Sainz. But Norris, of course, with the DRS as well. And maybe has just been holding onto his tyres a little bit, Lando Norris. I'm nervous. I'm nervous. Come on, Lando. Sainz, Norris, Russell, Hamilton now all spread by about 2 seconds. Carlos Sainz on the radio. Lando 0.8 behind with DRS, and Sainz saying it's on purpose, trying to keep Norris within DRS range, maybe just to allow Norris that advantage over George Russell and keep George Russell at bay for a little bit longer. The strategy coming into play now for Carlos Sainz. He's playing chess at the front of this Grand Prix, trying to position the Ferrari to take the win. But Lewis is also there as well. Both of the Mercedes cars effectively 2 abreast at this point as they go down towards turn 1. 4 laps left to go. And every single one of the cars in the front 4 within 2 seconds of one another. Nearly a second and a half. Lewis Hamilton is actually having to get out of the DRS of George Russell a little bit. Maybe just to cool his tyres a touch. There is a real battle between them. Yellow flag in Sector 2. What is that going to be? Alex Albon looks to have stopped. Is that going to be a safety car? Nope, he's got going again as Albon. Woo. Okay, we're in still. Green flag is raised just as these cars were about to come to where that yellow flag was as well. Carlos Sainz front tyres are finished, says Carlos Sainz. 4 laps left to push on this Ferrari. Struggling. George Russell all about these final 3 laps. Russell is all under Lando Norris's car. He's going to go for a move on Norris. And Norris has had to play defensive, but that might open it up for George Russell to get the run down now. George Russell and Lando Norris 2 abreast. Lando Norris going to come to the outside to defend and then moves up to the inside and gets the move done. Lando Norris stays in front of George Russell just about through that middle sector. And they're going to come around the final sector, final couple of corners, and 3 laps left to go now. Norris is in trouble now, though, because he's had to defend so heavily. The gap to Carlos Sainz now 1.5 seconds. He's not going to have DRS this time around, Lando Norris. Of course, he's pushing as hard as he possibly can, but lost so much time there. Both of the Mercedes in the hunt, and they're both right underneath. Lando Norris now within a second. Carlos Sainz, I think, doing Lando Norris a favor, dropping back just a touch to give Lando Norris the DRS, and it really has helped out. This is so close. It's in the middle part, though. It's the second sector. George Russell and Lewis Hamilton just all over. Lewis Hamilton looking so racy behind George Russell. I think Lewis Hamilton wants to get past his teammate and have his own go. Lando Norris still the car at the front of this 3, and Carlos Sainz holding on to the victory right now. Still, though, the gap is still 2 seconds, holding all 4 of these cars together. Sainz is doing absolutely everything to keep this involved. Either he's playing this perfectly, or the Ferrari just has fallen off a cliff. Lando Norris with DRS once again has been able to keep George Russell at bay. We go round the final corner once more. 2 laps left to go for Carlos Sainz and Lando Norris. Can the two of them work together? Former teammates at McLaren. Sainz now at Ferrari. Can they go the distance and keep these two behind? Russell and Hamilton are all over the rear end of Lando Norris. Lewis Hamilton has got to be gutted that he's behind his teammate because he looks so racy in that Mercedes. Lando Norris, another DRS pull from Carlos Sainz. And is George Russell out of the action now? Have they just pushed those tyres a little bit too much? George Russell, he's going to have to use all the battery. Use everything you've got. Pushing the Mercedes car to the absolute limit. Carlos Sainz still in first place. Lando Norris second. George Russell third. And Hamilton on the edge. George needs to pick up the pace, says Lewis Hamilton. Hamilton knows that this is in. Would Hamilton, have been able to do this had George Russell not been in front of him? It's one of those questions that we'll never know the answer to. But will Lewis Hamilton make a move on his teammate? He's only got this lap left to go. And George Russell doesn't look like he's going to be able to get past Lando Norris. They come around the final sector once again. And it's all over the place from George Russell, actually. He's nowhere near the rear end. Lando Norris not within DRS, though, just outside that 1 second. Maybe Carlos Sainz pushing now. Sainz is going to push Lewis Hamilton. He's all over the back of George Russell. Lando Norris outside of the DRS range, at least for now. Can he get back to within the DRS to help him defend from George Russell? He's going to go right to the line between these 3. Sainz, Norris, Russell, Hamilton, all within 2 seconds of one another, pushing to the end of this Grand Prix. And Sainz going around, holding off Lando Norris once more. Norris pushing as hard as he can to keep George Russell behind. And Lando Norris. Oh no! And that's the Mercedes of George Russell. It's gone! George Russell was struggling and he's thrown it away. Sainz, Norris and Hamilton is going to be our top 3 as Carlos Sainz comes towards the final sector. DRS for Lando Norris. What can Hamilton do? Can he take second position from George Russell into the barriers and out of the Grand Prix? And George Russell didn't deserve it. Had driven so well. Had pushed everyone to the limit. But it's going to be out of the points for him. Carlos Sainz, though, round the final corner, takes the victory in Singapore. Lando Norris holds on to second place. And Lewis Hamilton is in third for Mercedes. It's going to be a long wait until we see Charles Leclerc come around for 4th place. What a drive and what a finish from Ferrari. Carlos Sainz, take a bow. He did everything perfectly. Leclerc takes 4th place. Verstappen, an incredible drive from Max, gets 5th place as well. Gasly will be 6th. Piastri will be 7th if they can hold on to where they are. Lawson, a 9th place finish for the AlphaTauri, and would have finished in the points even without George Russell ditching it into the barriers at the end there. Kevin Magnussen takes the final points place. Unbelievable scenes. What a finish. Carlos Sainz absolutely ecstatic over the radio. Lando Norris will finish just behind him. Logan Sargent and Fernando Alonso still battling it out for 15th place. And there is the final order then. Everyone crosses the line to finish. And it is Sainz, Norris, Hamilton, our podium finishers. Leclerc and Verstappen in 4th and 5th. Gasly, Piastri, Perez, Lawson, Magnussen hold on for points. Albon, Joe, Hulkenberg, Sargent, and Alonso finish outside the points. George Russell into the barriers right at the end. Bottas, Ocon, Tsunoda also came to a stop early in this Grand Prix. And of course, Lance Stroll, who did not start the Singapore Grand Prix after his accident in qualifying yesterday. What a race. What a finish. And Singapore, thank you so much. That was absolutely exceptional to watch. Exceptional to watch. And there is George Russell. His car still in the barriers. Just went too deep, pushed too hard. The tyres were falling off a little bit. And the experience of Lewis Hamilton paid dividends. And Hamilton congratulates the team. I think he knows. I think Hamilton knows, had George Russell not been the car in front, had Hamilton had a go at Lando Norris, maybe this would have been different. But it will be Carlos Sainz who takes victory in Singapore this time around. Max Verstappen's win streak is over. The second victory for Carlos Sainz, and he deserves it. He led every single lap of the Grand Prix. Made sure that it was his. Best race of the season so far? Maybe. It's definitely up there. But yeah, at least Max didn't win. Max ran out of fingers. That's very true. The 10 will be the 10. I'm sure that 10 will stand for a very, very, very long time, though, from Max Verstappen. But Carlos Sainz is the man who breaks the streak. Carlos Sainz is the man who looks a completely new driver since the summer break. Carlos Sainz has been absolutely electric since the summer break. In Netherlands, he was super quick. Monza last time out, he was so close to battling for the victory, but couldn't keep the Red Bulls behind. This time, though, the Red Bulls made the mistake, and the man who is there to capitalize is Carlos Sainz. Charles Leclerc will feel maybe a little bit hard done by, fell behind because of that pit stop. Wasn't quite able to finish maybe where he would have wanted to on the podium. I think Charles Leclerc any other day would have picked up a podium. Lando Norris and Carlos Sainz embrace. And Lewis Hamilton takes 3rd place as he jumps out of his Mercedes car. What a race. Thank you all so much for watching. Thank you for all the likes and subscribes and so on and so forth. We are doing well on the channel, actually. This week's been a very good week for the channel, so I appreciate you guys stopping by. I will be live again for a little post-race chat at some point in the next couple of days. Also, get your hot takes in. Get your hot takes in. Head over to the community tab. fill in your hot take from this Singapore Grand Prix. And I feel like the hot takes are going to be very hot indeed. So yeah, if you want to get involved in the video, get over to the community tab, get your hot takes in, and then let me know what you think over there. Thank you guys so much. I'm going to disappear before Carlos Sainz lifts his trophy. But I will see you all in a week's time for the Japanese Grand Prix. So like, subscribe, all of that stuff. And I'll see you then.